A 5-year-old boy is tortured to death. Investigators say some of the abuse he suffered through included being kicked, slapped, punched, bit, and choked. The woman who put him through his horrible final months was his father's girlfriend, who was sentenced for her role in the young boy's death. But now the father is facing his own charges for what he didn't do to protect his son. The gruesome case unfolded in July of 2023 when 5-year-old Turner Simpkins was found dead inside his home. Prosecutors say emergency responders tried to treat Turner, but he was cold to touch. His body reportedly dropped to 86 degrees and he was limp. At the time of Turner's death, he was in the care of his father's girlfriend, Shannon Elliott. Elliott reportedly told investigators the 5-year-old was out of town the weekend before his death, visiting his mom. But when Elliott picked him up and they arrived to their home, she claimed Turner unbuckled his seat, opened the car door, and then fell out of a moving car. She claimed Turner told her he wasn't hurt, but he got scratches from it. However, prosecutors poked holes in that supposed story. They argued the car seat she claims he fell from was still inside the car, undamaged, and a drink cup in that car seat still had liquid in it. Shannon Elliott reportedly told investigators that Turner was alive an hour before responders tried to revive him. But when she was asked about his other injuries, like a black eye, she claimed that was from falling. She claimed the leg scratches were from riding his bike. But prosecutors argued none of the bruises on Turner's stomach were there before he left to his mom's house. Then everything changed when investigators found surveillance video at Elliott's job. After combing through the video, they said they saw Elliott being abusive to the 5-year-old for 40 days. Investigators say the footage showed Elliott slapping, kicking, punching, biting, and strangling Turner. She was ultimately charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of aggravated child abuse. But the case never went to trial. Instead, she entered a plea of no contest.
Ms. Elliott, you're here today charged with a number of very serious crimes, including felony murder, aggravated child abuse, and aggravated child abuse for involving torture. It has been indicated that you have agreed to enter a plea of no contest, but have you seen or been shown a copy of the charges against you and talked it over with your lawyer, and you and Mr. Vaughn discussed the range of punishment you're facing as well as any possible defenses you might have?
Yes, sir.
Well, it's indicated that you want to enter this plea of no contest or nolo contendere. That simply means you understand what the state's evidence is going to be. You're not going to admit you did anything wrong, but you're not going to deny it or contest it. And the state will then tell me what their evidence would be if this case went to trial, and I'll use that factual basis to find you guilty of these charges according to this agreement. Do you understand that?
Yes, sir.
Do you understand, however, that you have a right to plead not guilty to all charges and to have a speedy and public trial by jury? Do you understand that if you went to trial, you would have the right to have a lawyer and to have one appointed, as I've done with a public defender?
Yes, sir.
Do you understand that if you went to trial, you and your lawyer could confront that you would be presumed to be innocent until such time, if ever, the state proves your guilt beyond a reasonable doubt to the satisfaction of all 12 jurors, and their verdict will have to be unanimous before you could be convicted of anything? Do you understand that if you went to trial, you and your lawyer could confront and cross-examine every witness the state called to testify against you, and you could bring in your own witnesses by the use of a subpoena?
Yes, sir.
You understand that you would be presumed to be innocent. At trial, you would not have to testify or prove anything, and no inference of guilt would arise because you did not testify at your own trial.
Yes, sir.
Do you understand that if you went to trial and you were found guilty of a crime, you could appeal the conviction and the sentence imposed to the Court of Criminal Appeals and have a lawyer appointed to help you with that appeal?
Sir.
Do you understand that by entering this plea of no contest, you're waiving your right to a trial and to an appeal? And all I'm going to do is approve what your lawyer has worked out, which, as was pointed out, means that you will be sentenced on first-degree murder to life in prison with the possibility of parole. And then you will also have 20-year sentences on these other 2 cases as well. You understand that?
Sir.
And she was sentenced to life in prison for her role in Turner's death. I want to thank Upside for sponsoring today's Law and Crime YouTube takeover. Upside is a free app that gets you real cash back on gas, groceries, and restaurants. It's super easy to use. Just claim an offer in the app, pay as usual using a debit or a credit card, and get paid. And this is actual real cash back too. You can use Upside at places like Shell, Exxon, 7-Eleven, and even Chipotle. So to find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside, or scan the QR code on your screen, use our promo code LCTakeover, and get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Again, that's promo code LCTakeover for an extra 25 cents back on your first gallon of gas. Now, months after Shannon Elliott's sentence, her boyfriend Austin Simpkins, who was Turner's father, is facing his own charges after prosecutors say he did nothing to stop the abuse. He was taken into custody on January 6th after a grand jury indicted him on charges including aggravated child neglect and 3 counts of child abuse. According to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, Simpkins was aware his son was being abused by Elliott, and he did nothing to try to stop it and neglected to report any of the abuse to authorities. He was booked into the Cheatham County Jail and is being held on $500,000 bond. I'm joined now by criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Florina Altschiller. Florina, thank you so much for joining me today. What's your reaction to this case? First, the father's girlfriend is convicted in young Turner's death. Now the father is charged with child neglect, endangerment, and abuse. What's your reaction to this whole horrible case?
Unfortunately, we see cases like this all too commonly, and this is just a tragedy for somebody to be in a position where they are the responsible adult in charge of caring for a young, vulnerable person, to take advantage of that and abuse them like that. It's really just horrific.
And, going off of that, the circumstances surrounding this case are truly horrific and horrible, given that we do talk about these types of cases often. It always just sinks in me when it has to do with a young child. But in this particular case, you have bruises and scratches and biting and hitting. What do you make of that aggressive anger and hatred of such a young child that was committed, what prosecutors say was by the father's girlfriend? What do you make of that?
Oftentimes we think that adults, because they are adults, that their brains are fully developed and that their frontal lobe works and that they have self-control. And, that's an assumption. That's how we hope adults would act. And that's how, luckily, most adults maybe do act. But there are some adults who just are not mature enough, are not stable enough, and lack that necessary self-control to not behave like, let's be frank, animals. They're acting impulsively, they're acting without any reason and without pause. Most normal people do not commit crimes against children. There's just no excuse, there's no reason, there's no explanation for it other than somebody who is losing complete control and acting like an animal.
And why do you think Austin Simpkins, the father, and Shannon Elliott, the girlfriend, weren't charged together? Or do you think that the evidence came after her conviction that warranted these charges against Turner's father?
Oftentimes, there's evidence in the beginning, and as a case is investigated, there's additional evidence that comes out. I think with her conviction and her admitting and accepting responsibility, essentially, there is additional evidence that implicates him. And at that point, the prosecutors decided, well, he's not really free of guilt here either. We have sufficient evidence to charge him as well for participating in this or for legally being responsible for this as the child's father.
Yeah, and I was going to ask too, what do you make of Austin Simpkins' accusations alone? Authorities believe he knew this horrible abuse was happening and did nothing to stop it.
Right, and as the father here, he's got an absolute duty to stop this. Oftentimes what we see, which is even worse than this, is situations where a parent brings their partner into this relationship, which involves a child, and that partner will sexually abuse a child, and the parent will turn a blind eye to it because they think they love their partner and they think their partner can do no wrong. And even when a child reports abuse to the parents, oftentimes, really sadly, the parent does not believe the child because they take the word of their partner instead. Here, luckily, this is not a case of sexual abuse, but it is a horrific case of physical abuse, which is also clearly not acceptable, not normal, not how society should be functioning. And here we have a situation where the father was more interested in his girlfriend and being with his girlfriend, regardless of the behavior that she was exhibiting, than in taking care of, protecting, and providing a safe and secure environment for his child. And not only is that not acceptable, but it's criminal, and he's charged appropriately so for his criminal responsibility in allowing this to happen.
And I was going to ask, do you see that see his charges being upgraded to possibly negligent homicide, or are you surprised that he wasn't charged with any type of like homicide-like or murder-like charges? Given that he wasn't there at the time of the alleged or the abuse that occurred, but are you surprised that he wasn't charged with like a homicide or a murder?
So what saves him from the homicide charge is the fact that he was not there, or the evidence suggests that he was not there at the time. So anyone can be charged as a co-conspirator in a homicide, even if they're not the person who committed the abuse that led to the death. However, they need to somehow facilitate it or participate in it when it happens. I don't believe, and clearly the prosecutors don't believe, and that they haven't charged him with that homicide as a co-conspirator, that he in any way participated or was present. I have seen cases where a person who did not participate but was present. Think about the more common case of a getaway driver, right? You drive somebody over to a crime scene, they shoot and kill someone, you drive them back. You weren't involved in the shooting, you will be charged with that homicide for participating in it as the getaway driver. But here, from the evidence that we know, he really did not participate in it. However, he certainly created an environment which brought this woman into this child's home and allowed her to abuse this child like this. And so unequivocally, there is blatant negligence here, recklessness here, but there's really no intent on his part to participate from the evidence that we know in this child's death.
And given the charges that he is facing now, child neglect and abuse, are you surprised his bond was set at $500,000, or does that come as no surprise to you, given, the severity of what that little boy went through?
So it is a high bond considering the low level charges, but the facts are that there is a child who is now deceased, and that is horrific. And I think even though he's not charged with causing the child's death, that is a fact that cannot be separated. And he's very lucky that the criminal charges that he's facing are not homicide.
Austin Simpkins' girlfriend at the time, she ended up pleading no contest in this case. She didn't go to trial for this, but do you think that Austin Simpkins could be going to trial for his charges? Do you see that happening, or do you think he could do a no contest plea as well too?
So in every case, there's the possibility of taking a plea deal. There's the possibility of just accepting responsibility. And as every single person in America is afforded the right to go to trial and to have a jury decide whether or not there's sufficient evidence beyond a reasonable doubt of their guilt. I think here, because he isn't the one who physically caused that abuse, there is some gray area for him to try to defend himself and potentially even go to trial. However, the sympathy level here of a deceased child is so high that the risk is far going to outweigh any benefit. And if he can be offered a plea deal, some sort of step down reduction, there's really no reason to not take a plea, which would be an offer to a lighter sentence than what he would be facing if he goes to trial. Now, certainly many times the prosecution, when charges involve facts that are pretty egregious, doesn't offer a plea deal. There is no step down reduction. The deal is plea to the charge. And in situations like that, there's sometimes less incentive to plead guilty because there's nothing to lose. You may as well go to trial. The consideration there, however, is oftentimes the judge will hear evidence that comes out at trial that they did not hear earlier, because a trial really brings out all of those facts. And based on the facts that the judge learns at trial, oftentimes the sentence is going to be harsher, more severe, more years than whatever sentence they would have imposed had the defendant not gone to trial, because the judge simply did not have access to all of those facts, right? They didn't hear testimony from people about how horrific this was. They didn't hear medical evidence. They didn't see photographs of the injuries. And so there still can be a benefit to taking a plea, even to the charge, for a reduced sentence versus going to trial and essentially ensuring that you're going to have a harsher sentence. Now, under the law, a judge is not allowed to penalize you for exercising your right to a trial. So they can't give you a harsher sentence just because you went to trial. But practically speaking, what happens when you go to trial is the judge does give you a harsher sentence, not for going to trial, but based on the evidence that they learned from that trial.
Well, Florina Altschiller, I appreciate your insight into this case. It's just horrible overall, these circumstances. I want to thank you again so much for your time today. Before we sign you off, anything else you'd like to add about this case?
I think we've pretty much covered it. What a sad, sad case. And unfortunately, it's just yet another one.
All right, Florina, again, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
At the time of this recording, online records show Austin Simpkins is still behind bars. He has yet to enter a plea and is scheduled to be arraigned on January 14th. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.